Welcome to this year's edition of recapping every game that I played this year, where I share with you all the experiences I had throughout 2024. As you could probably tell, this video will be a little bit different than last year's edition for 3 reasons. 1. I did not play as many games as last year due to external circumstances and the general state of this year. School, work, other creative projects, and my mental health changing often took up more of my time than expected. I only played a bit more than half the amount of games last year, which was 34. Considering how unstable and unpredictable the world is right now and throughout this year and possibly the next year, I think I needed to relax to get through these emotions more than I needed to boot up software. Number 2. No tier list this year. I didn't mind it last year for the novelty of organization, but I don't really care for them as a tool for making media personally, as I feel it would be better to simply share the experiences with you. And number 3, the thoughts will be in sentence form and detailed rather than bullet points. Not only do I work better when I know exactly what to say, you get a complete and clear view of my experience. And without further ado, starting off 2024 with an odd experience made by one person where you as a rat travel through an endlessly branching sewer of dark tunnels, trippy sludge, and brick walls hosting the biggest wave in the sewer. You can encounter the standing inhabitants as they speak non sequiturs and observations amongst the wary rats. Fruit and cheese are collectibles, but they're not so important as they are just things that you can give to another rat, a snake, or even a gun apparently. While there are a finite number of rooms, the order is randomized through each tunnel, making for a very trippy experience. You even get into a fight with another rat in an RPG battle, and you either lose or win. I love the aesthetic of its hand-drawn style and line work that could be offset by the graphics. The only thing that isn't great is the platforming that occurs sometimes when you have a floaty jump but rigid camera movement in a direction. Regardless, it's certainly an experience that I will remember. Going back to itch.io to the massive bundle that takes up most of my library, I found this very simple puzzle game with a much simpler art style and premise. That being, you have to mark all the tiles from a colored checkpoint in increasing order. Soon you have to deal with different colored checkpoints and larger numbers in different tiles, and it becomes this organizing puzzle where you have to mark the correct order whilst managing several. There's a ton of levels, but it really gives you the leeway to experiment and determine the correct answer. A good simple puzzle game goes a long way. Looking for another small game? Air Dasher is a simple touch-based platform where you click to jump and drag to swipe in 8 directions. It becomes tricky to know when to jump to avoid the red stripes and where to swipe. It is a simple minimal art style of geometrical planes due to the size of being a mobile game, which suits this game more than using a mouse on a computer. Very good, but download it on your phone and play it on the toilet. On the topic of another small game that is coincidentally also a simple platformer, although this time you can only click it or press space to jump it, that's it. You have to know when to jump to not collide with the walls this time. Like the last one, it also has a simple art style with literal 3D geometry this time. Just a sphere and some 3D rectangular prisms. And yet, I had a lot more addictive fun with this than Air Dasher, mainly because it has a simple premise that leads to a lot of more frantic and interesting gameplay. Not only do you have to react quickly and jump precisely, but the features can also be an obstacle in of themselves to progress. The words that can be encouraging but also sneakily taunting, which lead you to die and try again over and over. Honestly surprised by this one, it's pretty great. I was feeling a little bit indecisive of what to play, so I decided to check from the Humble Bundle that I purchased and get a key for one of the games. One of the games was something I was actually enthusiastic for when trying to demo during one of the Steam Next Fest back in 2022. I got it, and as such, it is very much what I expected and loved from that demo, and even more. You have this explorer from another planet accidentally crash landing in a home as a massive universe with this wise old character who is trying to help find ports to build a spaceship. And basically, you trek through all of the house in order to find those components fulfilling objectives along the way. And how do you do them is through collecting the titular creatures, which you use to complete tasks such as holding stuff, bombing obstacles, getting to higher places, and even connecting electricity. The controls are simply pristine, even when aiming, as these worlds are massive and have plenty of nooks and crannies and opportunities to get lost in. I don't mind this because, 1, there are plenty of shortcuts to get to different ports faster, and 2, the worlds are dense but wondrous in their order mechanics, and you can find things easily. You explore the hallway in such areas such as the living room, kitchen, and office, all designed to resemble things like an amusement park or a kingdom from a small guy's perspective. If anything, it's more so aimed at collecting a discovery along the way rather than trying to fight everything at the end, which goes more for the tinykin and the pollen rather than the artifacts to small tasks. Believe it or not, there is somewhat of a greater narrative, although it isn't the main focus that lets you read all the main dialogue and discover a greater secret than ever before. Just beating this game, I can tell that this is easily one of my favorite 3D platformers. Very recently, there has been a recent content update to Super Kiwi 64, which adds save files, time trials for the main levels, and voice acted cutscenes that add some context to the adventuring in the airplane. But most importantly, a new set of 3 levels under the subtitle Doomsday, where an interdimensional villain of a melon and a mustache takes over a guardian where he raises from the dead. From a distance, this might feel like a bit of a swerve from a simple platformer about a kiwi with a glider, but consider some of the environments, decorations, and enemies being costumed mummies to be somewhat unnerving in nature. We get another Sayatro character, the titular Mechbat from Mechbat 64, who gets kidnapped. 2 levels are here, which you have the same objectives and format, but are significantly different from the base game in 2 different ways, and not just because of the purple shorts. One is a more vertical climb where you rely on detaching yourself and gliding everywhere, while the other is a complete western town that is greatly expanded with cliffs, trains, and tiny wooden houses. Both are great, but they both feel familiar enough to feel comfortable traversing through. The last level is one tricky finale, as you have to navigate through axes and prickling vines, and just dive into the cosmic horror while also being ultimately goofy with the boss who's just a robotic copy of the melon. This fulfilled my expectations greatly, and while I don't think this would be a recurring idea in his and his team's future games, it was a great experiment nonetheless. Here I am, returning to SpongeBob video games, not too long after the last one I played. Despite my declining interest towards exploring their video games and the show in general, merely just me having other interests I'm more passionate towards, this was a game I was excited to play way back when it was announced. I mean, a spiritual sequel to what many consider the best SpongeBob game released 20 years later, developed by a studio ready to do something original following the remaster, and seemingly having more of an expanded budget and scope. And scope is the important word here, as we take a simple premise of SpongeBob and Patrick accidentally causing havoc by proxy and expanding it over various multiverses of their home. Okay, maybe a little bit of a familiar premise, but it is a great excuse to explore and platform through various worlds. It controls pretty much exactly like in Battle for Bikini Bottom, analog moving, jumping once or twice, attacking. However, I feel as though there is a sense of fluidity and lightness in controlling precisely, and a bounce, and that is greatly expressed through the cutscenes where characters have such cartoony motion that matches watching the show. As such, where it differs greatly is in structure. The original has each world where, in a similarly linear fashion, we eventually end up at some point in the end for a boss, but you can fast travel to different parts of a massive world, simulating that open world feel. The difference here is that while there is a general premise of fighting robots that doesn't require too much in story objectives, here the premise is looming and constant, and the worlds are massive, with transitional pieces and variations, so it makes sense to be linear. I can see why it might be a jarring change for others, especially considering you don't have any other characters to switch to like Patrick, who's just a balloon that can lift you up and send you extra underpants. However, the moveset you have is expanded from those characters and transferred, meaning that you can glide, homing attack, and shoot bubble projectiles, and it is really snappy, if a bit unpolished. But I don't really care about the lack of polish or the abundance of references littered throughout, as much as it is a good experience first and foremost. To be honest, I found this game to be a joy to experience because it has so much charm and humor, and it feels as Battle for Bikini Bottom was actually finished and included all of its crazy ideas, just not in the exact way. Very few of the SpongeBob games feel like worthwhile times to have, but this was probably the most fun I had with the entire franchise. Even if I never come back to this again, I'm going to really remember the memorable platforming experience that stands far above its weight class. After a long period of not playing games for a long time, I had some trouble deciding what to play, so I looked again in that large itch.io library for something that pops out again. I at least needed something that was short and supposedly simple to get through. And it sure looks the part with its bright and clean aesthetic and the art design. Everything has some sort of rounded off and circular shape to it, from the characters to the environment. But if I'm being honest, it's a little hard to remember the experience as a whole because it really feels unremarkable. It's functional and it even has some cool orchestral music, except the final boss, but it's quirky in a fun way. But it doesn't really stand out in any mechanics. You have a run, but it's used only a few instances where it makes sense. There's a tiny bit of frustrating moments where you do have to tank some damage in tight spaces or going purposefully slow, but it doesn't completely make sense why you have a run command. Maybe the frustration comes in that limited health bar that makes you restart the whole level, but I feel as that there should have been some time of checkpoints, especially in a longer level. But overall, it's perfectly average, but I think that younger kids can enjoy this a little more than I do. A long time ago, I played a game on 3DS known as Epic Mickey Power of Illusion, in which you play as Mickey with the paintbrush and traverse through locations. I had it when I was younger, but I really got frustrated due to its slow nature. It's not until now that I again stumble upon this game on sale with Steam along with DuckTales Remastered. Just to get familiar with the game, I played the Genesis original and, while charming in its look and music, still feels frustrating with its slower jump and meticulous obstacle dodging, and I couldn't get past the second area. And yet, this remake really works for me. For when it has 2.5D and 3D sections, and you can walk inside the castle now. The controls have a good feeling that it has a floaty jump, but it has some weight to it, which makes the dodging manageable. It's extremely fun to head bounce repeatedly. It's a simple game, but it's anchored towards slow pace and meticulous platform. But since it's better telegraphed than evident to see and avoid, I find myself cruising through. There are even collectibles in special sections of the stage that feel like strange events to stumble upon, like the upper parts of the tree, or even in a cup of tea. Also, the music is really good, with Grand Copa rearranging the original to be much more whimsical. They put a lot of more effort than what was needed for a remake like this. So, at the time, I started a new social media account on called Co-hosts, and it's pretty quiet, but it's surprisingly buzzing with game developers. As of this video, it's read-only and now set to be deleted. There is one game that I found through a random post, and it's easy to access and runs through the browser called Liminal. A very brief visual with a beautiful watercolor sketchy artwork involving the meeting of two X's that really becomes emotional. Tentaclescape is a tile-filling puzzle game with Cthulhu, but it has an interesting mechanic which you have to fill two different sections at the same time, so you have to be wary of which movements you make. The other is Summon Squad, a puzzle game in which you place squads command on the boards to get to the other side. I couldn't really get into this one, to be honest. The highlights here are two other visual novels. Jupiter's Understory is one that's environmentally focused with some beautiful analog artwork and an urgent message. There's especially Winter Story, a back and forth dialogue between a daughter and a mother about the bond that only stays strong, despite difference and change, and it honestly made me tear up a little bit. That's how beautiful it is. I had to check out Tender once I figured out it works, but a high recommendation. Okay, so update. I actually did get Tender to work out. It's definitely the most appealing game visually with all the different plans. You do the same mechanics, but the game is short enough that there isn't a problem, and you get a lot of information about the characters. Look, I was bored. I saw how long to beat in the store, and they saying, hey, this shouldn't take too long to beat, and booted it up. I made my character and became Peppa Pig's friend, going into a house and doing various tasks inside and outside the house.
Where are you going, little
You
one?
go into the grandparents' house, the playgroup, the forest, the mountain, and the castle, and at the end, Potato Land. You basically play several episodes of the show as you do pretty mundane tasks. Now I get, this is a game made for babies. When I realized though, for as simple as they are, it becomes pretty monotonous as you just move left or right and press the E button over and over again. It's sort to feel like this isn't actually stimulating and more just placating. Like using the analog stick to scoop sand would be much more engaging for this point and click game with a controller. I feel though with more activity mechanics, it would engage clips as closely as they do with watching Cocomelon, I guess. But yeah, mediocre. Play Pajama Sam with Freddy Fish instead. I think this is a game I actually owned beforehand and played briefly a long time ago. But since I only played for around 5 to 15 minutes, I want to call this replaying the game. I love how quietly it starts, with the menu screen featuring a car driving to the woods, which the protagonist's aunt takes them for the summer near the mountainside. You are Claire, a bird looking for a signal to receive an important call. The only problem being that there isn't any signal unless you climb the peak of the mountain. And so you go on a journey to climb the mountain, while exploring the island and its inhabitants. You have the simple controls of running, jumping, and gliding, but this game builds upon this base by introducing these golden feathers that let you add an additional jump as well as climbing that you find in the wild, and or by doing task and interaction. There's a very character-based and casual sense of humor that you find in the inhabitants, which helps Claire feel much more attached to the world around her. I really love that you can loop around the entire island over and over again, but there are many crevices that you could find accidentally. It's a game it's comfortable to get lost in, made better by the art style and mixing the realistic landscape with a pixelated filter, and these talking animals that gives its own slice of life charm. I love how it doesn't get too difficult, but it naturally blocks things for the player to incentivize getting the feathers so that you can climb up the cliffs and to the very top, with that ending really caps your journey and the long glide down. Excellent game. Wow, what a random game to play in the year 2024. So this is a game that was on my old Xbox 360 before I gave it away and decided to turn it on again. For the memories. So this is an adver game, but in the lightest sense of the word, only used for the title, as you have an obstacle course wipeout inspired platformer where your Xbox 360 avatar jumps, runs, and swings through obstacles to the goal of with the challenge beating certain times. Very simple conceit, but the realistic physics add to the challenging and immersive experience. This is one of the few games that I played in that video where I tried out several games in my Steam library. And this is when I decided to continue with. So I started over my game, but I had a more reliable ergonomic mouse this time. I was compelled to open boxes and touching everything just to figure out what these objects are. What I really love, even going deeper into the mystery of what these truly are, is how each are unlocking the key for a new discovery for the museum worker and the player, but are easily told through contextual clues as to not be cryptic. The coolest discovery is that the main parts throughout the levels building an alien spaceship to the planet with the archaeologists who have gone missing, which leads to the next chapter and sequel as of writing this. I am a big fan of Sayato's work, so much that I bought the Super Kiwi 64 plush. His next big project is Tori Saturn, being inspired by Saturn games, I think, But the title's over, a compilation of games with another developer released made up of Torii Genesis, Torii Jumble Dam 2, and Torii Missions. And it really pains me to say this, but I feel like this is way more of a mixed bag than a slam dunk. Genesis is a cheeky ode to Sonic Adventure and the Genesis games in aesthetic and gameplay that is fun, if a bit unwieldy. The Jumble Jam 2 is more of a mess that feels impossible to complete, even with the really good ideas. The missions, however, are interesting for its usage of familiar ideas of the previous games into challenges. Honestly, I might just wait for Torii Standard to be a graded single-player experience. Another game that was free on the Epic Games Store randomly,
Honestly,
but this looked
like
interesting enough to obtain. I had no idea what this was, but except that it has a bear with an axe, and that looked very cool. You start off sleeping until a woodpecker comes to inform you that an evil corporation is destroying the woods. So it's up to you and your axe to save the critters and humans and restore it to what it should be. In each level, you progress from your bear house to the main corporation, but the path has a routine level-by-level progression. There's an introductory scene where the critter unknowingly walks into danger due to the gentrification and fracking, and you have to free them and destroy the evil. When you have an axe, you can interact with almost anything that's out of place. Now, you can't destroy the main thing yet, but you earn recycling cubes to be packed to restore a place for an upgrade, and then destroy larger objects that repeat again until restoring the main port to free the animals in that section and progress.
So what are these here?
There are 3 different badges. One for complete restoration of the area, freaking everything. One for nature-loving people, which is found by slapping the people in establishments and restoring them, indicated by a change from grayscale to full color. And one for destructing a bear trap hidden somewhere in the level which you turn the camera around. One issue I have is the camera controls in this case, feeling heavier than expected and not being able to see everything. Although, I guess this makes sense given how each level is done in a certain way where the camera shifts to a new view. Hitting is more of a contextual action than a mere tool, so you end up hitting everything until something reacts. But I do mainly love how cartoony it feels whacking something until it base, and the edges of objects when it's touched. It also changes mechanics slightly, hitting switches, riding on turtles and water, and even bomb tenors, though you really have to be annoyingly precise to hit it. Despite the small flaws, it's super charming and actually very based. A relaxing puzzle journey that remains simple yet achievable and doesn't really last too long, giving me 2.5 hours of complete environmentalism that I recommend. One task I do have sometimes is organizing my games into a list on the site backlog to see how many different games I have on PC. The largest library I have is on itch.io, as I mentioned before, mainly due to this charity bundle I bought 2 years ago, along with other stray purchases. I think this leads to a total of around 600 games. Because of the variety of games differing in art style, mechanics, and length, I categorized by genre, clicking on each game page to check which they are classified under. One such game I thought stood for 10 milligrams, but in fact stands for a 10-minute game as part of several objects by this dev team. You are a snake-like sentient substance escaping from an abandoned laboratory and containment facility. And that's pretty much all that you're given. You dodge turrets and navigate through portal-like mazes. The only thing you need are the directional pad or keyboard areas to go in 4 directions. You dissipate at the rear and you change direction by stopping first. The odd thing are the turrets and orbs and frogs that you swallow, but it does provide a short yet strangely sweet treat as you build momentum by looping to break the barrier to gain freedom. It feels weird to control at first, but it gets easier as you navigate seamlessly. It's cheap as well, so if you need something under now, this is a Metroidvania for you. Okay, so I played another one of these games. This is a light horror experience in which you drive somewhere and end up in a dilapidated mansion. You have to traverse through it. That's all the info you're given. And the game's supposedly taking around 10 minutes of your time. One thing I noticed is the blending of old pixel styles with newer textures, creating this sort of uncanny feeling that's intentional, much like playing this on an older television that's rounder and analog. Much like that analog signal that's not quite functioning, there's a lot of jittering that occurs around the player, and in general, and while I get why it is used, I find it very bothersome for my eyes and mood, so I rather go without it. But the main part of this game is navigating with a singular circle of light and solving puzzles, with these eyes that followed you at certain sections in the path to the door. There are a few moments of microgame clicking for certain actions which are effective for those moments of tension. I was able to get through most of them without so much time, though you have to be slow and steady with the eyes in some points. But in the end, you don't escape the supernatural family drama of this house. This is another small experience. It is worth playing. You're into horror, but don't feel like playing a larger game. Another year, another viral multiplayer game. There's been a few that have exploded in popularity, at least when viewing how many playthroughs on Twitch and YouTube I've seen existing. But this was one that actually caught my attention, mainly due to its genre. I like fishing mechanics in video games, and I'm one of the few people who like the big to cat fishing stages in Sonic Adventure. And this was also cheap to get. So this is exactly like the title. You fish with other players and have a chill, relaxing time. You move with the WASD kits and move the camera with the mouse. And while it is a bit strange at first, when you relax, you can navigate effortlessly. You can get to bait and get to the nearest body of water and swing your rod in. You wait until the catch is found, which takes you to the frantic part, where you hold the left click until a mark, where you mash clicking for the number of times shown, and repeat until you complete and get a fish. The number of clicks and marks and the positioning gives you different catches and a funny quip, much like those found in Animal Crossing. You can keep those catches, sell them off for money, or place them in an aquarium. You can use that money to buy accessories, drinks, buckets, or different bait for different catches as you level up, and there are also quests you can complete just by happenstance. But you can simply just fish and interact with other players. The game mainly relies on the ambience and little music inside the beatboxes you can trigger, but this game is meant to ease you into that state of mind. I mainly go into this with friends, lobbies, and interact with others, but this game also fits a solo experience as well. I suppose the developer didn't expect this game to get so much traction this quickly, as they are hopefully fixing the jank hidden parts, but I think this adds the charm even more. Pretty great after a long and stressful and bad day.